Hey there, I'm Scott. I'm going to teach you how to population model today. The first thing we do is in Insight Maker, we create a stock. Now, a stock is a primitive that stores some quantity. For instance, a stock could be a mug, it stores coffee or tea. A stock could be a bank account, storing money. Or in this case, a stock could be a population storing people, storing the number of animals, storing the number of amoeba. In this case, we're going to model a population. So we create our stock. We can put it in our Insight Maker canvas wherever we want it. Then we have to make one key choice, which is the initial value of that population. So this is the initial number of people who will be in our population when we start the simulation. I'm going to choose 100 just to get us going. So that's 100 people. Once we've done that, we can click Simulate to simulate our population over a time of 20 years. Now this looks very boring. We started at 100 people and we continue throughout the simulation at 100 people because we don't have anything that is changing that quantity. So the next thing we need to do is we need to add a flow. A flow moves material between stocks. So in this case, the flow will move or add people to our population. We're going to call this flow births because it will represent the net births of people added to the population. And we'll give it a value of, let's say, in this case, 10. So what that means is in net, every year, 10 new people will be added to the population. When I say net births, we're going to use this to represent both births and deaths. So the number 10 is the number of births minus the number of deaths that year. So maybe there were 15 people born, 5 people died. The net number of births is 10. Great, let us simulate that. A bit more interesting. Now we start at 100 people, and every year we add 10 more. So we go 100, 110, 120, 130, and so on. A little bit more interesting, but not very realistic. In general, when you look at growth of population, you see an exponential sort of curve. And why that is imagine you had 2 fruit flies, and each pair of fruit flies might give birth to 4 new fruit flies. So those first 2 give birth to 4, and then each of those pairs give birth to 4 more, leading to 8. So every cycle, the number doubles. It goes from 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32, an exponential curve. Let's implement that right here. To do it, the first thing we'll do is we'll create a variable. This allows us to add a constant to the model that will represent the net birth rate. And we'll just choose a number, let's say 0.03, so 3% net growth every year. And we'll just put it in right here, and then we'll connect it. We'll connect it to our birth. Then we'll go to our birth, and we'll change it. Instead of being a fixed amount of 10, we'll enter a formula. And what we'll enter is the population times that birth rate. This will mean every year our population size grows by 3%. Let's run a simulation. Now what we can see is the population starts at 100, and then it grows by 3 the first year. And then the next year it grows by a little more than 3. And it keeps growing faster and faster every year. So there's a little bit of a curve. It's a little hard to see though at this scale. So let's increase the time range of the simulation. Right now we're simulating for 20 years. Let's simulate for 100 years. And we'll see if that trend is clearer. Here we go. Now it's much more clear. You can see at the start it's growing pretty slowly, but by year 100 we're adding 50 people every year. So the growth rate in absolute terms is getting ever bigger and bigger due to this exponential growth. We could even simulate all the way out to something like 1,000 years. And I'm just going to zip along to the end. When we simulate 1,000 years, we can see, let me also get rid of that birth rate figure so we just see the population. We can see that in the graph, it looks basically flat for the first 800 years or so. And then it shoots up to gigantic numbers. This is 5.7 times 10 to the 14th. So that's bigger than billions, that's bigger than trillions. I don't even know what that's called, but that is a very big number. And that is the power of exponential growth. It starts to grow hugely large as time progresses. Now, in reality, things won't actually happen like that. There's always limits, some form of limits. There's, let's say this population is on an island. There's only so much space for this population. There's only so much coconut trees, so much fish that can be fished from the oceans around the island. There's a limit to this total size. And that limit may change as new technologies are developed, or maybe the population expands to adjacent islands. But given a fixed island, there's a limit on the total amount of people that can be supported on the island. Now we can implement that in our model using this concept of a carrying capacity. A carrying capacity is the maximum amount of people that can be supported within a region or within the model, or in this case, on this island. So let's just create a carrying capacity variable and give it a number. Let's say 10,000. We're going to say the maximum number of people that our island can support is 10,000 people. And then let's connect that carrying capacity to our birth rate and also connect the population size to our birth rate. So now our birth rate, instead of just being a fixed value, we're going to make it a function based on the population size and the carrying capacity. And the way to think about this is when the population is very low, so let's say much lower than carrying capacity, not near it, then the carrying capacity is irrelevant. It doesn't affect the birth, and the birth rate should be this base birth rate. But as you get closer and closer to the carrying capacity, as the population gets to 9,000 or 9,500, closer and closer, the carrying capacity will reduce that net birth rate. So the population will start to grow slower and slower. Let's implement that. There's an elegant way we can implement that. We'll just take that, I apologize, not here. We'll just take that birth rate and multiply it by the carrying capacity minus the population. So what this does is as the population approaches the carrying capacity, this value approaches 0. When the carrying capacity equals the population, this is 0, and the birth rate is also 0. We can divide it by the carrying capacity to normalize it. Now what we have, when the population is 0, this formula is just carrying capacity over carrying capacity, and the birth rate was that initial birth rate. Then as the carrying capacity approaches population, this approaches 0, and this whole formula approaches 0. So the birth rate, the net birth rate, again, birth minus deaths, is also 0. Let's simulate this and see what we see. We're still doing 10,000 years. I'm going to go back to 100 years, so it's a little bit more manageable. And let's see what we see here. Now we have our population. It's shooting up. It's approaching that carrying capacity, not reaching it. I'm going to just go quickly in and change that birth rate to a bigger number, that base birth rate to a bigger number, so we can see more of an effect. Now as we come in, we see the population shooting up, initially exponential curve, but then around year 40, year 50, or 60, it starts to flatten out and actually slow down as we approach this carrying capacity, which is the yellow line. Let's edit this graph to remove the birth rate. We don't really care about that in this figure. With this carrying capacity concept, we now again have exponential growth to start, but then it starts to slow down. It starts to level off, approaching the carrying capacity and getting closer and closer to it, but never surpassing it. We can explore this interactively to understand this a little better. To do that, I'm going to create another variable and call it base birth rate. Let me just link it to the birth rate, and we'll just use it to have that 0.1 value or 10% birth rate, and we'll just replace it with that variable. So now we have this birth rate in a standalone variable. We'll also add sliders to our model. These create little interactive sliders that I can slide and adjust and see results change in real time. I'll do that both for the birth rate and for the carrying capacity. And let's just make this start at 20,000. Now that we've added them, let's run our simulation again. I'm going to remove that base birth rate from this graph right here, so I don't have it. And now I can just interactively go in and adjust the carrying capacity. So let's increase the carrying capacity here and see what happens. Nothing actually much happens. Of course, the absolute value of the population size goes up, but there's still the same sort of S-shaped curve. You still have exponential growth, and then the population approaching that carrying capacity and slowing down as it approaches it. So again, no matter what the carrying capacity is, we get the same sort of fundamental curve shape. Let's play with the birth rate now. Let's reduce the birth rate. Here, if you reduce the birth rate, we have the population slowly increasing, much slower than before. It looks exponential, but it's a little hard to see because it's pretty flat. But it is exponential, and if we continue the graph for 1,000 years, we would still see that S-shaped curve. We can try a higher birth rate, a much higher one. even higher. And if you make it higher, the growth of the curve is sharper, but again, you still get that S-shaped curve. When you have this carrying capacity concept, there is a maximum growth, and it doesn't matter whether the births are faster or slower, the base birth rate, the end story is the same. You approach that carrying capacity. So this is a very basic model. It just helps to illustrate some topics in population modeling. You could do a lot to extend it, experiment with new ideas. For instance, carrying capacity. Here we're treating it as a fixed value. Our carrying capacity is 9,600. In reality, though, carrying capacity would change. People might invent new technology, new farming techniques that will raise that carrying capacity. Or they might, again, our island, they might develop boats and go to adjacent islands and expand that way, also raising the carrying capacity. So there's a lot that can be done in exploring different variations of the model and seeing how it affects simulation results and exploring that. I hope this has been helpful to you. If you want to learn more about these things, if you want additional videos on additional topics, just comment down below. And thank you so much for listening. Really appreciated it. Bye.